What is up, everybody? We are one more month down for the year of 2024, quickly approaching quarter four of this year. I swear to God, every year I get older, it just feels like years turn into months. Like, what the hell happened to 2024? Nonetheless, we got a really weird group of movies this month. I mean, we have a whole bunch of them that are likely to end up in my bottom 10, bottom 15 of the year for various reasons. And then we have a number of them that are likely to end up in my top 5 of the year for various reasons. So we don't have a whole lot in the middle this month. We got a lot of shit and we got a lot of awesome. As always, guys, let me know your thoughts down below, your thoughts on all of these 11 new release films that I was able to check out this month and how they stacked up for you. I also have full reviews for most of these films, so throughout it, I'll put a few links for some of them, but ones that maybe I don't have a link, if you just searched, you're likely to find a full review on my channel. But just going to get into my brief thoughts here today and wrap up the month that was August 2024. Coming in at number 11 for me is a movie that most of you probably have not heard of, and this is hashtag AMFAD, also known as All My Friends Are Dead. And the only reason that this movie ended up on my radar is because it is directed by Marcus Dunstan, who, of course, gave us a few of those middle Saw sequels, but I know him and respect him a lot more for bringing us The Collector and The Collection, and hopefully, very soon, The Collected. And I hate to pick on low-budget independent horror films, but this movie sucked. Basically, the premise here is that you have a group of friends, a bunch of college students that are going off to this music festival, and they're able to secure this really sweet deal on this Airbnb. And while they are locked into this Airbnb, one by one, they are killed off in the style of one of the 7 deadly sins. And as they start to kind of pick through the rubble, if you will, they realize that this may be tied to a event from their past involving a friend of theirs that committed suicide. Not the most original premise in the world, certainly not something that gave me a whole lot of promise aside from just hoping that Marcus Dunstan's real visceral style was going to come in here, and I'm very disappointed to say that pretty much all of the kills are just laden with terrible CGI blood. I mean, there's a certain tolerable amount of CGI gore that I can get into, especially dependent on the tone of the film. But when you got the guy that gave us some Saw sequels and The Collector and The Collection, where a lot of that was practical, or at least seemingly practical, maybe they used some digital effects in there, to have a movie where it's just so CGI laden, I can't even enjoy the carnage candy in the film, which unfortunately is about the only thing about this film that you are able to enjoy, because while the story sets up in this situation where you're like, okay, maybe it's like a modern version of Seven, it never gets that deep. And the multiple twists that it goes for, it's one of those films where each twist kind of is more ridiculous and less satisfying than the previous one. And this movie has one of the most egregious choices for stunt casting that I have ever seen. JoJo Siwa gets top billing in this movie, and she is not anywhere close to one of the main characters. She's literally just shown in quick little flashes, quick little flashback scenes, and little shots here and there throughout the film. And it's blatantly obvious when you see these scenes that she was shot probably in post-production after they were able to secure somebody to throw a name on this poster, because she doesn't interact with any of the rest of the cast. Even in scenes where it's supposed to be conveyed that she's with some of the other cast members, the camera clearly cuts to just JoJo Siwa in a room and then cuts to a similar looking room with the rest of the cast. And look, I don't have any hate for JoJo Siwa as a person. Obviously, I am not of the demographic that would be a fan of hers, but I have been unwillingly exposed to this chick constantly for like the past 7 months. And every time I turn on TikTok or anything else, I almost always have 1 or 2 of her videos coming through where I guess she used to be like some kind of a pop kids icon with big, fluffy, colorful bows. And now she's tried to shed that image as harshly and as most desperately as possible. And so now I just constantly get exposed to these videos where she's like, hey, I drink liquor and I say fuck on stage. Yeah, I'm edgy. Karma's a bitch. She adds nothing to this film. Obviously, she's not an actress. The few things that they do with her, they're like, JoJo, can you like look really emotional for a second? Action. Great, here's your check. And the fact that so much of the story hinges on her character, I mean, I don't know. I could go on and on and on. This is a movie that most people, it's not even going to end up on their radar, and there's a reason why. I don't know if Marcus Dunstan just kind of took this for a quick little job here and there. I really don't know. But this is easily the worst thing that I've seen him do and was very disappointing. So Obviously, I don't recommend that you rent it or spend your time with it. Coming in at number 10 is going to be Borderlands, the latest effort from Eli Roth, and this movie is just a mystery of what the fuck happened. I mean, you have obviously a pretty high budget here. You have a lot of really good production value as far as creating this planet and doing the costume design and capturing the look of the video games. I am a casual Borderlands player. I've only completed one of the games and I've played 3 of them, so by no means a massive fan, but I've certainly played enough to have an opinion on how this compares to the games. But casting-wise, it's so strange, which apparently there was a much better version of this script that actually enticed people on the level of Cate Blanchett to sign on, and now we get just kind of what you would expect from a video game adaptation, just a whole lot of nothing. And so all the characters really don't stand out at all. A lot of them feel like they're not even here to really utilize their skills as an actor. Like you have Kevin Hart in here in a role that's not funny whatsoever. And the story is just kind of a big nothing burger. There's really nothing going on about it that draws you in. It eventually goes into a weird place in the third act that feels absolutely out of nowhere. And so this is just one of those films that you look at and you just go, why? What happened? What was this supposed to be? What was this going to be when everybody signed on? And how the hell did we end up with the version that we ended up with? Coming in at number 9 is going to be Afraid, the latest low-effort film from Blumhouse. And look, this is where these lists get a little bit weird, and especially when you get to a section of the year here where I have a lot of movies where I'm rating kind of within that 1.5, 2-star rating. And, you know, I did say in my review, like, this is not as egregious as some of the other Blumhouse releases this year. And I don't know. I don't know if I would stand by that. You know, it's been less than a week since I've seen it, and just it's so nothing. It's such a nothing film that while it didn't annoy me on the level of some of those other ones because I didn't have near as high expectations for them, which even those expectations weren't very high, I don't know. Is it worth giving credit to a film that just does nothing? I don't know. I don't think I would. I don't think I should. So I actually would probably go back and give that film a little bit of a lower rating. And so essentially you got Afraid, and it's like, you know, if Alexa or Siri decided to get a little fixated on the family and wants to be one of us. And so you have a situation that's really not all that original. How many different evil AI movies have we had over the last number of years? And it just does nothing with it, aside from bringing it into the modern age with some modern context, like having self-driving cars and having deep fakes and having, you know, kids swat each other, weird new age shit. Aside from that makes it stand out a little bit, the movie just does nothing. I mean, you have the first hour of the film where it's all basically first act stuff, where just the AI is in the family. The family doesn't even feel real. Like, they all feel like they were written by AI, which doesn't end up being a part of the story or reveal in any way. It's just badly written. And then out of nowhere, like literally on a dime, it's third act shit where suddenly they're all against the AI and death is happening. And it's like, where the fuck did that come from? Where was the buildup? So this is just yet another movie over the last year, maybe even arguably 2 years from Blumhouse, where you just go, guys, what the fuck is going on over there? Like, Blumhouse always had a shaky track record. They would have a great movie. They would inevitably always give me one of my favorites of the year, and then they would give me 1 or 2 of my bottoms of the year. But here lately, I would say aside from Megan over the last 2 years, it's just been nothing but gigantic fail. And now I look at them as like the movie studio equivalent of the Walmart bargain bin. Like, I know exactly what I'm walking into with these films. I know exactly what level of quality that I'm getting. And I could probably write my positives and negatives from the fucking parking lot before I even see it. And it's just so disheartening for a studio that, for a time, was literally leading the charge of horror filmmaking, where you would go, God, look what they were able to do with such a small budget. Take note, everybody else. And now you look at what they're doing and you're going, do not take note of this. This is not what we want as horror fans. So please do anything else. You know, and again, it's a fairly innocent enough experience. It's not a movie you're going to walk out infuriated by, but it's a giant fucking pile of nothing. Now we have number 8, which is M. Night Shyamalan's newest Trap, which is inevitably going to be my number 1 most disappointing film of the year. At least hopefully. You know, we got a couple more bangers coming out the rest of the year. I hope to God they don't disappoint me on this level. I am somebody that always champions this guy. I love what M. Night Shyamalan does when he's on. He's responsible for a number of my favorite films of all time, but he has just got the spottiest, most extreme hit or miss track record of any filmmaker in my generation for sure. And Trap seemed like such an easy win. You get Josh Hartnett, who's a guy who I've always loved and I've always championed, and I've always wanted to see him get a lot more credit and a lot bigger roles than he's been able to get, especially over the last 20 years. And you put a scenario that sounds really interesting. A serial killer that is stuck in this arena in a concert that is actually a secret trap to try to snuff him out. And so I walked into this expecting this to easily be one of my favorites of the year. And it was just such a massive letdown because the writing of this film is just so subpar in every way. From the dialogue to the interactions of characters to most notably just absolute bullshit logic issues throughout the entire fucking movie. And I understand we all have different levels of tolerance. Sometimes people are very easily able to just forgive all laws of reality and logic to go along with the story. And there's times where I'm able to do that. But I have a limit. And by about the 30-minute mark in this film, when suddenly every single scene, in order to work and in order to keep the plot going, relies on just absolute 100% bullshit, I have to tap out. And it just continuously gets worse throughout the next hour of the film. Eventually, they leave this arena and the movie just goes off of a cliff. And so, I don't know, I've covered this movie extensively. This is, for very much to my surprise, been the most controversial thing that I have done all year round. I mean, I got my share of bullshit on Twitter for this one, but I've done a review. I've done a spoiler rant review. I've ranked all of M. Night Shyamalan's films. So I've talked about it pretty extensively if you want to see some of my other thoughts on it. But yeah, this is one where they needed at least 2 or 3 more passes on the script, and it just seems like M. Night's in this turn and burn phase of his career where it's just like, get to the next one. Every single year I got to get a movie out. I think he's got 4 more in some state of production. Pause, dude. Pause and make the movies just a little bit better versions of themselves. Don't get into this turn and burn mode because it's not going to serve you well. Coming in at number 7 is The Crow. And, you know, this bottom 4 here, aside from All My Friends Are Dead, are just like movies that, I don't know, like they're all just kind of interchangeable versions of bleh. So The Crow is a film that I was actually hoping and expecting that I was going to be one of its defenders. I love the original film, not really been a fan of any of the sequels. I think Salvation's actually a little bit underrated, but overall, not a fan of the sequels. And so I certainly expected this movie to pale in comparison to the original, the 1994 film, but I figured it would still be a pretty decent time. I knew that all the hardcore fans and all of the hardcore Brandon Lee fans especially were going to shit all over it no matter how good it was just because of what it's doing, and somewhat deservedly so. I still don't understand why they decided to call this character Eric when they could have called him anything and just avoided a lot of that bullshit, but nonetheless, I expected this to be a pretty decent time if nothing else, and I would walk out saying, hey, if you remove all your emotion from the first film, it's actually pretty good. And my God, was it just the worst version of what it could have been, to where you look at the filmmakers and you just go, why? Like, if this is what you had for us, why did you bother? Why did you look at a fan base that pretty much in unison was telling you, we don't want this, don't do this, we hate this idea, and you were stubborn enough to just weather through all of that and say, no, give my film a shot, and this is what you give us? This is the answer to all of the controversy that you have just weathered for the last couple of years? Why? This movie was so fucking boring, and it was so fucking dull. I mean, you have a film that spends 45 minutes of runtime on what is supposed to be this like generation-defining romance, this love that is going to transcend the afterlife. And it's literally like a weekend fling between 2 junkies. You don't buy into the love side of this whatsoever, nor do you really invest yourself in either of the characters because they're not really all that interesting or likable. They're just a couple of junkies. And it's even hard to completely sympathize with them for the horrific murder and everything because it's like, guys, you knew they were after you and you're just out going to raves and partying and hanging out in your apartment and shit. Like, what did you think was going to happen? So once you get past all of that, which is just an absolute drag, you get into a section of the film that's at least 20, 30 minutes long where Eric Draven has been resurrected, but he's like unsure about things. He doesn't know if he really wants to take revenge, and he's kind of skittish about his powers, and he's not really much of a badass in any sense of the word, which is a section of the film that I just didn't feel was necessary. It's just not interesting, and it's not really getting us on the side of this main character, and continuously undercuts what's supposed to be this ungodly amount of love that he has for Shelley that's going to transcend, the afterlife. And then you get about a 15, 20-minute segment of the movie where he's actually the Crow. That's pretty decent. That has a really solid action sequence at the opera. There's some really solid gore and some nasty kills in there. And I was just like, dude, why the fuck isn't this the whole movie? Like, there was no way you were going to capture the cult classic appeal of the original. There was no way you were going to get atmosphere or style on that level. So why bother? You clearly didn't have anything good in mind as far as developing out the romance more, because we got about 2 minutes of screen time of these two together in the original film and totally bought into the tragedy and the despair of their love. You gave us half a film and we could give a fuck. So why not just go the schlocky action route and just make this like Crow Wick? Why not take that opera sequence and just make the whole movie that? Why they didn't do that, it blows my mind. And so this ends up being a film that I just don't understand the appeal whatsoever. It's not enough action for action fans. It's not enough Crow for Crow fans. The romance and everything isn't there to really get the chicks in there that are into the romance side of things. I mean, it's just a giant fucking dud. So it sucks. I was really hoping to be one of the champions of this movie, trying to, stake the flag and say, hey, it's got a lot more going for it than you're giving it credit for, but it absolutely does not. Coming in at number 6, now we're starting to crawl out of the bullshit, and we have I Saw the TV Glow, which is a film that actually was released a few months ago, but this was the first chance that I was able to see it. And this one was very complicated for me. It's a movie that I think is very creative, very stylistic. It's very interesting with the metaphors that it chooses to have. And I really appreciate the creativity that was at play here in trying to convey the experience of what it's like to be somebody with gender dysphoria. And I think they do a really good job with that. However, my biggest issue with the film is that I feel like it shows its cards very early on. It lets you know exactly what type of experience this is going to be, and it just never really evolves from that. It just kind of continues to restate the same thing about this character throughout multiple points of their life, which for some people might be satisfying in the fact of just showing like the length of time that this character has not really changed and how imprisoning that can feel for somebody. And I get that. But for me, for a film that is so slow paced and is so deliberate with how it just meticulously and slowly peels back the onion and has these really long, slow, drawn out sequences, especially of dialogue continuously throughout the film, that feels artificially drawn out. It doesn't feel like it's merited. It feels like it's there to almost test your patience. If you have a film that's going for that, I want some kind of a reveal by the end of it. I want something to have somewhat of a reward for me investing in all of this. And it just never really comes. It just kind of continues to do the same thing that it did in Act 1. And so for me, ultimately, as an experience, I didn't care for it so much. I can recommend it to certain people. I could see exactly the type of people that would love this film and champion it and go nuts for it, and that's awesome. I wish I could have had that experience with it. Just didn't. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Stream. This is the latest film from a number of the people involved with the Terrifier franchise, Terrifier 2 and 3 specifically. And this is basically a slasher film where you have a group of people that are in this little resort hotel that has been locked down, and you have 4 killers that are stalking through the hallways in the hotel rooms, murdering people for points for this online streaming game where people are able to watch it and bet on the survivors and bet on the ferocity of the kills and things like that. And I think if you're a slasher fan who likes what the Terrifier team does, this is something you're probably going to enjoy. The gore and the kills are very solid. There's a number of them that I actually think are pretty cool, one of which involving tic-tac-toe, where I was like, whoa, that was pretty gnarly. I like the design of the killers. I like for the most part, I like what they do with a number of the horror alumni casting with Danielle Harris and Tim Reed and a few others that I thought was pretty good as far as actually playing a meaningful character in the movie. Jeffrey Combs, especially, I thought was the star of the show here. But it's one of those movies that it just bites off way more than it can chew. It's a 2-hour film that only has the story to sustain a 90-minute film at best. And a lot of that is because they have just crammed the cast full of all of these horror alumni actors. And so you have Dee Wallace in here. You've got Dave Sheridan, Felissa Rose, Bill Moseley, Tim Curry, Tony Todd, even more than I'm listing here. And so it causes a situation where they try to have these standout sequences with these horror alumni actors, and it just ends up padding out the runtime way too much. And so it's a movie that ultimately I did enjoy. I am curious to see what else they can do with this franchise if it's successful enough to get a second one. And I think most people that are the target audience will enjoy it overall, but wish I could have gotten a tighter version of it. I probably would have enjoyed it significantly more. Coming in at 4 is going to be Blink Twice, and this is a movie that I actually squeezed in last night. This came out the weekend that I was leaving for Phoenix, Arizona, so I did not have a chance to watch it, and then I was sick for a few days, so was dragging ass on seeing this one, hence why you're getting this film on the 4th instead of the 1st. But this was an interesting movie. You know, this is one that definitely is kind of a mixed bag for me, but it's a movie that I'm glad that I saw, and it's a movie that I actually would want to watch again. So this is Zoe Kravitz's directorial debut, and I think she does a fantastic job. She really has an interesting style, and the shot choice mixed with the editing style, and even the way that they utilize the score to kind of match the beats of the editing style in certain spots was really interesting, and it creates kind of this disorienting, dreamlike quality to the movie, especially in the first 2 acts. And so essentially what you have here is you have a group of women that are invited onto this island with a bunch of dudes who are kind of the entourage of Channing Tatum, who is this I think he's like a tech mogul or something. He's a big, rich fucking guy that everybody pawns over and everybody loves. And so he's got his group of buddies, and he's got these women that he invites to just basically go onto this party, this island that is just there for them to hang out and do drugs and swim and go boating and just fucking party sun up to sundown with no consequences whatsoever. And the main character of the film, over the first hour or so, starts to notice these tiny little odd details. And so inevitably, this is a film that is slowly building this sense of intrigue, this sense of mystery. And so the third act, the last 30 minutes or so of the film, is all of the answers and the payoff for all of that. And for me, this is one of those classic examples of a film that tries to do too many twists. Whenever I talk about a film like Frailty, one of the things I always say about it is it's amazing how every single twist this movie goes for, and there's like 3 or 4 of them, is better than the last one, and it reinforces the one that came before it, because most films that try to do this absolutely just stumble over themselves. This is one of the ones that stumbles over itself. You have the first reveal, and you're like, oh, interesting, that's what's going on here. Okay, cool. And then you have another one that kind of stretches logic a bit, and you're like, I don't know. I'm still with you, but that's a bit of a stretch for me. And then you have one in particular involving the main character where it's like, okay, now I just have a myriad of questions, and by the end, the movie does nothing to answer any of them. And so that one twist in particular, I'm like, why does that even need to be here? Like, it doesn't even really reinforce what you're talking about in this movie. It doesn't really add anything to what's going on in the third act. It's just yet another thing that's crazy and unexpected out of nowhere, and you're just left going, how does that work? I have a lot of questions. And so ultimately it ends up being a film that I was kind of frustrated with, because whenever you have a movie that is very smart like this and is trying to say something and it really has a message and plan for you by the third act, when it kind of stumbles and is trying to juggle a lot and ends up dropping a lot of it because it's trying to get a little too clever, it's always frustrating for me. When I want a smart movie to be able to land on its feet, not fall on its face. And so just a bit too much that they're trying to do here. Also, the actual note that it decides to end off on, like the last minute or so, really puzzled me. I've kind of thought about it ever since last night, going, how exactly does that fit into the overall message? Like, what exactly are we trying to say by the end of this film? And for me, it's just one of those things where it kind of almost contradicts what the movie is about. And I wish I could get more into specificity with it. Maybe I will in the comment section for those of you guys that have seen it. Just put a spoiler alert. But yeah, for a movie that's so clearly about this, to end on that note almost feels like it's anti that. It almost feels like it's dismantling that message and kind of being hypocritical. And so it just ended up being a film that I really enjoyed, and I respected the artistry at play here, and respected especially a directorial debut of a filmmaker. It was really interesting and has great performances, by the way. Channing Tatum is really fucking good in this. But it just ultimately doesn't come together in the best way possible, and that's a little disappointing. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Strange Darling. Now, this is a film that I actually saw about a year ago now at Fantastic Fest last year, so I've been impatiently waiting for everybody to join the conversation for it, and my God, have a lot of you joined the conversation. I've seen a lot of social media love for this one. I've seen a number of people going off and doing reviews for that, and it's awesome to see. It's a shame that this is not the top grossing film of this month because it absolutely deserves to be. So this is a really interesting play on the serial killer cat and mouse type of scenario. And it's a film that I really can't tell you much about it. If you haven't seen my review, it was very difficult to review because this is a film that I encourage you to walk in absolutely blind. But Kyle Gallner and Willa Fitzgerald are incredible in their roles. I think it's a really well shot movie. You've got Giovanni Ribisi here as the director of photography, and he does an outstanding job for somebody that's worked in Hollywood for decades at this point. Never even realized that he had the talent for, the eye of the camera the way that he does here. Really interesting uses of color. It's a movie that is a very simple premise, but it's elevated by the way they decide to tell the story out of order and what information you get at what point in the experience, as well as just the artistry on display from the filmmaker and the director of photography and the character costume design and stuff like that. So it's really a movie that you need to put on your radar. I enjoyed it highly, and I'm glad that everybody else is enjoying it as much as I did because, like I said, I've been waiting for a while to see if I was alone or if everybody else was going to see how awesome this was. Coming at number 2 is going to be Cuckoo. This is also a film that I saw a number of months ago, back in like March or April at the Overlook Film Festival. It was my second favorite film of that festival, only behind Abigail, and I could not wait to see it in theaters with another audience, and I loved it even more. This is a movie that is not going to be for everybody. It is very weird. It is very off-kilter. It is very odd and strange. And it goes for a lot of really weird, bold ideas, some of which don't even fully get explained. And sometimes that would absolutely kill a movie for me. But I loved this one. Something about how ballsy and crazy and out of its mind it just continued to get as the movie went. I just really love what it was doing. I think it had genuinely some of the best scares that I've seen all year round. I loved the characters. I think Hunter Schafer did an incredible job here. You have Dan Stevens, who's just having an awesome year, who gives a really fun, creepy, weird performance as the villain here. And the movie never hides that he's the villain, so it's not like some kind of a twist reveal, but it's almost like fun and playful how all the other characters in the movie besides Hunter Schafer don't realize what's going on with this guy when he's so mustache swirling, and he just has like this really thick, almost comedic German accent that it feels fake in the best way. So this is a movie that is just absolutely batshit insane, and it's going to inevitably be in my top 10 of the year unless the next couple of months are just fucking insanely stacked with awesome movies. So I absolutely loved Cuckoo. I would encourage everybody to check it out. It might not end up being your cup of tea, but for those of you that do end up really liking it, man, it's a crazy experience. But number 1 for me is going to be Alien Romulus, and I am so relieved that this is my number 1 because this was one of my most anticipated films of the year. This is a franchise I've loved my entire life, and I've just been waiting for them to do something to get it back to the glory days. And I was actually shocked at how controversial and divisive this movie ended up being for a lot of people. It actually turned out to be a very much love or hate type film, which surprised me, for especially as much as the Alien fan base seems to have asked for pretty much the same things for decades now. Like, let's get back to the first 2 films. And then they do a film that's like that. And it's like, it's too much like the first 2 films. I want something unique. So I don't know. I mean, all opinions are valid. If you saw Alien Romulus and you just said, this is derivative, this is just kind of looking back at the past when we should be looking forward, and all it's doing is pointing me to 2 better films, I understand that perspective. I don't personally have that experience with it, but it's all good. For me, this gave me exactly what I've wanted from an Alien film for well over a few decades. It gives me the tone and the vibe of the first film while kind of approaching and eventually building to the approach of Aliens. I think that it captures the look and the vibe of those films better than any other sequel. I really enjoyed a good bit of the characters. There's a number of them here that are just cannon fodder, but I like the 2 main characters especially. And so it's a movie that it really just captured what I've wanted. And I thought the xenomorphs and the facehuggers especially are the scariest they've ever been in the entirety of this franchise. And the movie takes a pretty big swing while also kind of going back to something that we've tried previously in this franchise in the last 20 minutes. And it's kind of been a moment that has broken the film for a lot of people. That was the moment that they just kind of tapped out and said, no, I'm not for this. For me, I thought it was fucking wicked. I thought it was gnarly. I thought it was creepy. I thought it was really well done as far as the effects. And that is literally a person in a suit, which is like, what the fuck? How does that exist? And so to me, I loved this movie. I had a great experience with it. The only negatives that I had was the callback lines and the unnecessary deep fake character that we got here, which didn't offend me on the level that it offended some of you, but I can still agree that's the weakest parts of the film. But I love what Fede Alvarez brought to this, and it's been a success story as far as the box office, so I hope we get a sequel to this. Whether Fede comes back or not, I hope they get a filmmaker on his level to come back and continue this story, because as far as I'm concerned, Alien's back on track, and it's full steam ahead, baby. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put the playlist up here of all of my month wrap-ups for 2024 so far. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.